So thank you for attending this Turf Alternatives webinar. We're going to talk about a few different conservation challenges like protecting water, supporting pollinators, and even reducing the heat island effect. My name is James Woolton. I'm a sustainable land care manager at Metro Blooms. Before my time at Metro Blooms, I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota's B Lab. I guess that picture that you're seeing of me might give it away just a little bit. But during my time at the B Lab, my research was focused on how can we redesign the turf lawn to make it a surface that works well both for human needs, so thinking of things like aesthetic needs and maintaining the ability to have recreation on the surface, but also taking into consideration pollinator needs. Specifically, how can we get some low-growing flowers into a turf grass landscape? So I took that knowledge and that foundation over here to Metro Blooms, where I guess my expertise is kind of being expanded to just thinking about all different kinds of turf alternatives we can use to support bees, to make an area look aesthetically pleasing, but not going all the way away from turf, thinking of both sustainable types of turf we can use and perennials that we can use in a turf grass landscape. So first, why find alternatives to turf in the first place? And we like to think that turf does have its place. It's a hardy surface to play and lounge on. So if you use your yard frequently and you play a lot of games back there, you have picnics, you like to lay in the grass, walk in the grass, play in the grass, that is very important and valuable. So we don't want you to think that you have to completely remove this surface. And even from an eco point of view, an eco-friendly point of view, it does have a dense network of shallow roots that help to control erosion. So if you compare it to an area with poor turf grass coverage or with lots of bare soil present, that surface area is going to be at a much higher risk for erosion than an area covered with turf grass. But turf does also have its drawbacks. So turf grass, especially highly managed or poorly managed turf grass systems, they have they might pollute ground and water surfaces when you over-fertilize and apply pesticides. So every time we fertilize a turf grass area, we're putting on lots of nitrogen and even sometimes phosphorus. And when a rain event comes after that, a lot of that nitrogen and phosphorus gets washed away into the nearby body of water. If any of you have been to some local lakes in Minneapolis, like Lake Powderhorn, for example, that's one that's just covered in algal blooms. And the primary reason for that is just an excessive amount of nitrogen entering that body of water. So if we want to keep our lakes and rivers and all of those other nearby bodies of water nice and clean and safe for recreation and safe for wildlife as well, we really want to limit the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that enters those waterways. We also waste an excessive amount of water when we water our lawns, when we apply irrigation. Here in Minnesota, this past year was our wettest year to date. You probably only needed to water your lawn 2, maybe 3 times throughout the entire growing season. So if we can think about both types of turf grass we can utilize that don't require as much water, and think about how we can water smart, only watering during periods of drought, that can really improve our environmental footprint. They deplete nutrient resources, so I already mentioned nitrogen, but also phosphorus in the form of fertilizer. And every time we mow, we're expending precious fossil fuels. And what I really would like to focus on is this idea that our current turf grass systems lack ecological function. So today I'm going to try and help us all think about how we can manage a turf grass system or how we can manage our lawn areas to improve their ecological function, bring back those pollinators, bring back the native insects, and bring back the wildlife that feed on those insects and depend on those native flowers and insects. Remember, when we bring life back to your lawn area, we're not just bringing back a bee or a butterfly or a ladybug. We're bringing back all of the entire ecological food web that interacts with those species. So I like to think of this as building food webs rather than just providing solely pollinator habitat. And it's important to understand just how present turf grass is within the United States. So by the numbers, turf grass covers about 50,000 square miles in the United States. And this isn't something that's specific to like the huge urban centers of a New York City or the urban centers of Southern California. If you look right at Minnesota, that area right at the Twin Cities, that huge chunk of green, that represents an area of high turf grass coverage. So there's lots of turf grass in the Twin Cities, in the greater Twin Cities, and throughout really the entire state of Minnesota. By land cover, 2% of the continental US is turf grass. So what we want to do is we want to take those areas that are currently turf grass and convert at least some portion of those back to native prairie plantings, back to eco-friendly plantings that'll benefit our pollinators, that'll be more sustainable. And what we want to do is we want to go through a number of different options, starting with the most familiar, the most similar to a typical turf grass setting with low maintenance lawns, then going to a nice middle ground between what a pollinator wants from a lawn and what a human typically wants from a lawn with the pollinator-friendly lawns. And then finally, we're going to kind of turn the system on its head, turn things completely upside down, and really get creative with what you can do in your lawn area on your residence and talk about some perennial ground covers that you can utilize. With those second and third options, the pollinator-friendly lawns and the perennial ground cover, you'll see that I put L2L in parentheses right beside them. And what that means is those different planting types are covered by the Lawns to Legumes program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Lawns to Legumes program is and how all of us today can get involved with this program. So yes, a little bit about the Lawns to Legumes program. So Lawns to Legumes is managed by the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, and where Blue Thumb and Metro Blooms come in is we help with the education and technical assistance associated with this program. Lawns to Legumes is a state-run program that seeks to provide funding to Minnesotans directly in the pockets of residents to help them convert portions of their turfgrass lawn into some pollinator-friendly habitat. The goals of this program is to protect pollinators with a focus on the federally endangered state bee, the rusty patch bumblebee. And we want to do this by assisting landowners throughout the entire state of Minnesota in establishing high-quality pollinator habitat. And it's not enough just to get this pollinator habitat in the ground. We want to make sure that these pollinator habitats are maintained, that land care is provided to them. One of the main roadblocks we see when we connect with residents is they can be super enthusiastic right as they're getting started planting and in that first year after the planting gets in the ground. But that motivation can kind of waver over time. The land care starts to slip, they forget to maintain their planting. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that these plantings are in the ground for many years, 5, 10, 20, 30 years at a time. We want these plantings to exist for decades rather than just a few years. So we really want to make sure everyone is aware of the importance of land care in terms of making a planting last for a long period of time. So I think I saw a hand up. Since we're a smaller group here, if you're the individual that had your hand up, throw your question in the chat window or in the Q&A box and I'll get to it. For now, I'm going to continue with the presentation, talk a little bit about my good friends, the bumblebees, but I have no problem stopping and chatting in between slides since we're a smaller group here. So in that past slide, you probably heard me mention that we have a state bee, and myself being an absolute bee lover, I mean, I've spent, I think, the last 8 or 9 years of my life studying pollinators. Even I recognize that you don't get a state bee unless there's something really important, really critical happening. And that, unfortunately, is the case with the rusty patch bumblebee, where the rusty patch bumblebee is a bee species that was once common throughout much of the United States, certainly strong populations in the north-central United States, the northeast United States, and even pretty strong populations in the mid-Atlantic along the East Coast, and some parts of the southeastern United States. What we've seen in the past 20 years or so is that the populations of the rusty patch bumblebee are really starting to decline. We've seen losses of right around 90% in the past 20 years or so. And when we consider range constrictions, so if you were to stick a pin in a map, would you find the rusty patch bumblebee, yes or no? We've seen the range of this species contracted by greater than 99%. What's lucky for us as Minnesotans is that Minnesota is still one of the strongholds for this species. So that means when we put pollinator habitat into the ground, we have this unique opportunity to conserve an endangered species. So since we all have this really great opportunity, and since I want to encourage everyone to become a part of the Lawns to Legumes movement, I want to make sure we all have a little bit of a background in what the rusty patch bumblebee needs to survive. So a little insight in the ecology and basic biology of this bee species. So first, the rusty patch bumblebee, like many other bumblebees, is a ground nesting bee. That being said, it really doesn't care too much where it nests in the ground. Anything from an abandoned rodent's nest to just a bare pile of dirt, that'll make perfectly suitable nesting habitat for the rusty patch bumblebee. The second point is one that I'm really going to hone in on, and that's the idea of having blooming native flowers in your gardens throughout the growing season. There are some pollinators out there that are active early in the season, some that are active out there late in the season. The rusty patch bumblebee is really an all-seasons bee. From April through October, it will be out, it'll be looking for food, and hopefully it'll be able to stop in your yard to get some of that food. What we want you to do is we want your plantings, your gardens to reflect that. So we want to make sure that your gardens have things blooming throughout the growing season, blooms present from April through October. That way the rusty patch bumblebee and all of its friends have constant access to forage. Something else that I'll be focusing on is this idea of connected, high-quality habitat. When we talk to residents, it can be a little bit difficult to get them to really believe that their actions can make a difference when it comes to conserving an endangered species. What we want to think is you're not alone in this effort to conserve the rusty patch bumblebee. We're all in this together. And what we're doing is we're going to try and work together to create a pollinator corridor or a pollinator highway, where we want the entire state of Minnesota, the entire city of Minneapolis, to be one long connected patch of pollinator habitat. And where you come into play is your individual planting is like a rest stop along that pollinator highway, where when the rusty patch is trying to get from high quality patch A to high quality patch B, it can stop at all those little road stops that we're all planting individually to stop, grab some nectar, grab some pollen, and continue on its way. So try and think that you're not saving this bee all by yourself. We're all working together to make a pollinator corridor where the bee can travel freely and successfully throughout the entire state. And finally, this is a bee that really needs protection from harmful insecticides and fungicides. Whether it's when we're sourcing our plants, when we're going out and purchasing plants, or when we're preparing to install a new habitat, or even when that habitat's installed and established and we're thinking about how we apply maintenance, we want to make sure that this bee is protected from all those potentially harmful insecticides. So when you're thinking about where to source your plants, it can be really useful to go to a native plant provider that knows they're not applying any neonicotinoids to their plants. When it comes to installation, you're thinking about how to prepare an area for a planting, and same with maintenance. Try to think of chemicals as an absolute last resort, where we want to encourage you to use integrated best management practices when getting an area prepared for install or doing some maintenance. So if you're trying to get that grass out of there or a harmful weed out of there, don't think of glyphosate as your end-all, be-all blanket option to get away a weed or prepare an area for a planting. Think of it as your absolute last resort if you really have no more solutions on how to get a plant out of the ground, how to remove turfgrass, how to remove a weed, etc. This map shows the priority funding zones for the individual support grants. The individual support grants are in the form of cost shares of up to $350, where for every dollar you spend, you have to provide a 25% match. So if you were to ask for $100 in funding from the state of Minnesota, we would need to see proof that you provided $25 yourself. Do note that we accept in-kind funding or an in-kind match, where we value your labor at $25 per hour. So if you ask for $100 and then do an hour of work getting your planting installed, that can count as your match as well. So over to the map on your right, there are 3 priority zones. The first of which is that dark green area, which represents our area of highest priority. What this means is we've seen the rusty patch bumblebee here recently, and there's already some high quality forage there for the bee. This means that we see that the rusty patch bumblebee can have populations here, and we want to give it the tools it needs in order for those populations to grow. So we believe that you getting those plantings in the ground can help the rusty patch bumblebee have its populations expand. The second priority zone to focus on is that kind of a lime green color, and this is our secondary priority zone. If you live in this area, one of 2 things are true. One, we've seen the rusty patch bumblebee here, but not too frequently. So there's historical records of the bee being here, but we haven't seen it there in quite some time. Or you already have some high quality habitat near you, where if the rusty patch bumblebee were to spread into this area, we believe it would be successful and have lots of food readily available to it. The third zone that we're going to talk about is that pale yellow color. And if you live in that pale yellow color, that means we don't have any historical records of the rusty patch bumblebee. And there's also not really too great a forage nearby here. But we want to make the entire state a pollinator corridor. We want this bee to be happy no matter where it is in the state. So you still can get funding in this area. You'll just have slightly lower odds in our lotteries as compared to the lime green and dark green colors. These grants aren't the only way that we're making funding available and individual support available to Minnesotans. We're also offering workshops like the one we're doing today, and we're making lots of really great online web-based resources available to you. I'll talk about those later on. Lawns Legumes is still accepting applications. We're currently in our 2nd round of funding. That's open until June 2nd. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't already, to go online, go to the Blue Thumb website, and apply for some of that lawns to legumes funding. Even if you don't receive a grant, it's a great way to show our Minnesota legislators that this is a program that Minnesotans are passionate about, they really support, and it'll help make lawns to legumes a continual thing rather than just a one-time funding opportunity. Here is an example of some of those web-based resources. Bowser created this Planting for Pollinators guide, which goes into really great depth on all the different planting options and the needs of pollinators in order to survive. You'll hear me cover some of those different planting options like bee lawns, native pocket plantings, pollinator meadows, etc. But I can only cover them so much in the allotted time we have. If you really want to get some more great detailed information on those planting types, I encourage all of you to go online, go to that Bowser website and access the Planting for Pollinators guide. It is a fantastic tool for any yard project that you're hoping to do related to installing native plants. What they've also created are these planting templates, which are so invaluable for new and experienced gardeners alike. I know in working with new gardeners, part of the intimidation can be there's just so many plants to choose from. And what this planting guide does is it takes the guesswork out of it. There's thousands of native species. How can you know which work together, which ones are good for bees? Bowser's gone ahead and they've created some planting templates that show you species that work really well together, how to arrange them in a garden, etc. They even go as far as to include replacement plants. So let's say for one reason or another, you're not a huge fan of swamp milkweed. They include some replacement plants that you can use in place of some swamp milkweed so that you can kind of customize the planting to your liking. Finally, another question that we get very frequently is why lawns to legumes? What's the name of how did that program get its name? And what is a legume? If you're thinking, why is this program called Lawns to Peas? Peas are in fact legumes, but there's a far greater variety of plants than just peas within the lawns to legumes, that's included in lawns to legumes and within the legume family. So really great native plants like purple prairie clover, lead plant, and milk vetch are all examples of legumes and pollinator favorites. And even some really great non-native plants like a Dutch white clover, which is used in our bee lawn mix, is an example of a legume as well. But just because this program is called Lawns to Legumes, that doesn't mean you can't use other native pollinator-friendly plants as well. So anything from a wild bergamot to a blazing star, which is an absolute favorite of bees and monarchs alike, and even a late season bloomer like an aster, we encourage you to plant all of those native pollinator-friendly plantings. The God's honest truth about why this program is called Lawns to Legumes is because it rolls off the tongue nicely and politicians really liked it. When this was going through the House in the state of Minnesota, this is kind of just the name that stuck. And Lawns to Legumes just rolls off the tongue a lot nicer than Lawns to Pollinator-friendly native flowers, but also Dutch white clover because it works really nicely in a bee lawn. So just keep that in mind. Any and all native flowers are welcome to be included. So at this point, we are going to stop for questions. I'm also going to stop for a drink of water. So if you haven't already, check out the questions that are in the Q&A box. Feel free to give those a thumbs up vote if you feel like that question is important to you. I'm also going to launch our first poll outside of our tech poll. Oh, I see that one of you is having a little bit of tech trouble. If that is the case, shoot me a message in the chat window and I'll be happy to help. So the next poll that we're going to do is just about lawn use. I want all of us to think critically about how we use our lawns. This is going to help you determine which planting types are going to be the most suitable for you. So in the Q&A window, Sonia Peterson asks, I've heard of a product called Natria, which is derived from iron. Can get rid of all the Creeping Charlie taking over my lawn. 2 questions re Natria. 1, is Creeping Charlie a native pollinator-friendly plant? And 2, if not, would Natria be harmful to the native pollinator-friendly plants? That is a wonderful question. So I cannot tell you how many questions I get about Creeping Charlie. I get so many questions about them where actually during my time as a grad student, I wrote a whole fact sheet. I wrote a whole guide to Creeping Charlie and its value to pollinators. And the basics of it is, even though we see pollinators on it frequently, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for pollinators. Think of it as like the Whopper or the Big Mac of pollinator food, where just because you visit it, that doesn't mean it's nutritious for you. Where with Creeping Charlie, it, 1, doesn't make any pollen actively readily available to the pollinators, and 2, the nectar uses this theory called the jackpot theory, where it's really no different than a pull tab, where if you're a bee visiting that Creeping Charlie, You go to a flower, it has no nectar in it. You go to a flower, it has no nectar in it. You keep visiting those creeping Charlies with no success. But then every once in a while, you'll hit a creeping Charlie that's just chock full of nectar. And you think to yourself, wow, this is the greatest flower on earth. I better visit it exclusively. I need to buy 1,000,000 pull tabs. I'll get rich. That's what the bee is thinking. But really, in reality, it's much more beneficial to these bees if you use a native species with a much more consistent nutrient content. So I'll talk about Dutch white clover later and self-heal later. Those species have really consistent nutrient production. They're really great for our pollinators, and they're a much superior alternative to the creeping Charlie. I hope that was a suitable answer. I really love that pull tab example. I feel like it really resonates with the true Minnesotans. Kristen, I'm not going to try your last name here. I'm too afraid to mess it up. Kristen asks, where can I find the templates you showed? That's exactly what I've needed forever. Kristen, it's on the Bowser website. Before we end today's presentation, I'll stop sharing my screen and share the URL. But it can be as simple as just Googling lawns to legumes, and that'll do the trick. It'll take you right to it. Oh, Sonia, thank you. I forgot to answer the second part of your question. I got too excited talking about creeping Charlie. So what about Natria? Is it dangerous? So chelated iron is actually a pretty safe chemical route to go. And when it comes to creeping Charlie is an absolute bear to get rid of, where you almost have to use some sort of chemical product, some sort of chemical alternative. And iron, specifically chelated iron, is a really great product to use. If you want to be as safe as possible for the pollinators, you want to use these products. You want to use these products outside of prime bee foraging hours, and also on days that aren't windy. The windier the day, the greater the risk for the chemical to spread. And if you spray outside of the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 p.m., you'll be spraying when bees aren't really too active. So Sonia, Natria and other chelated iron products, a fantastic option. So when I say chelated iron, that's just the active ingredient within Natria. Judy says, white clover is difficult to find. It needs to be purchased within 150 miles. Can this be purchased from feed mills? So Judy, Dutch white clover is actually the one exception within the Lawns to Legumes program where we don't care where you buy it from. Since we're using this in a bee lawn where, the only thing it's going to outcompete is turf grass, we don't think that it's all too important where you buy it from. It's not native to begin with, so you're not going to really be able to source it locally. But Judy, in the chat window, do you live in Northeast Minneapolis? Or do you live in some other part of the city? You can also feel free to turn on your mic and just let me know verbally.
I'm in White Bear Lake.
Oh, you're in White Bear Lake?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do happen to have a nursery right in Northeast Minneapolis called Mother Earth Gardens that sells Dutch white clover for a very fair price, 50 cents per ounce. But if you'd rather just buy it online, that's easier for you. Outside Pride carries it on the internet. They sell it for like $7 for a pound, super cheap, and 1 pound that's enough for like you and your 3 closest neighbors. So as a simple purchase as much as $7 can be enough to turn your lawn from a boring green monoculture to a bee haven. You can find over 50 species of bees on Dutch white clover alone. Can't recommend that species enough.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Judy. Okay, so that looks like all the questions we've gotten here about the Lawns to Legumes program. I'm going to close that first poll all about lawn use. It looks like we have one person who says they use their lawn frequently. So if that's the case, you're going to want to think about our options that are either a little more isolated, you just have to alter one section of your planting, or a little bit less of a total overhaul where we're just asking you to change the species of grass that you're using or just throw in a couple low-growing flowers alongside it. You're really probably not going to want to turn your lawn into a pollinator meadow where it's acting like a restored prairie. Half of us said that we use our lawn with moderate frequency, and 38% of us, 3 of us here today, said that we use our lawn with low frequency. And this is just something that you want to keep in mind as I go through the different options for turf alternatives. So now I'm going to go through those 3 different turf alternatives one at a time, starting first with low maintenance lawns, then transitioning to pollinator friendly lawns, and then finally concluding with perennial ground covers. So when we think about if a low maintenance lawn is right for you, we want to think about how comfortable are we deviating from that typical lawn appearance, where yes, these are still going to be similar to a lawn, but if you're expecting and hoping for that perfect, pristine 2-inch Kentucky bluegrass lawn with that deep green color, this might not be for you. You also want to think about how much you use your lawn. If you use your lawn minimally to moderately, this low maintenance turf option is going to be the perfect option for you. We're just going to let it kind of have a little more creativity. Let it, we're not going to have that perfect pristine look to it. We're going to have a little bit more fun in our lawn area. So something you'll hear me talk about a lot when I talk about fine fescue and other low input turf grasses is this idea of being low maintenance or low input. And when I call a turf grass either low maintenance or low input, it means a few key things. First, it is drought tolerant. It does not need to have much water applied to the surface. So these generally have a little bit of deeper root systems, and they don't need to be watered nearly as frequently. They also have a slow vertical growth rate, which impacts how frequently you have to mow. So we want to be out there expending as few fossil fuels as humanly possible. Say that 10 times fast. So a slow vertical growth rate greatly reduces the frequency with which we have to mow. We're also going to be talking about grasses with low fertility needs. Low fertility needs mean you don't have to apply nearly as much nitrogen, as much fertilizer to the surface. Great for the environment. Disease resistance and insect resistance, not too important for the purpose of today's talk. Just note that when I say insect resistance, that's not talking about pollinators, that's talking about root and vegetation feeding insects. So think like resisting grubs, getting grubs out of the surface. And I talked before about the kind of costs of a turfgrass area, but I also want you to think about the environmental benefits of a low input lawn. So they do an incredible job of preventing soil erosion and stabilizing dust. If you have a lawn that's really not too densely covered or there's a lot of exposed soil, every time it rains, there's going to be a ton of erosion away from that surface. They also filter contaminants from ground and surface water. That's tied to some retention of stormwater. They release oxygen to the atmosphere. So this is a green surface. It's constantly converting atmospheric CO2, atmospheric carbon dioxide into oxygen. It also conducts carbon sequestration and helps to moderate air temperature. So in these urban heat islands and urban areas with tons of concrete and impervious surfaces, it tends to be a few degrees warmer here than maybe rural areas where there's less of that concrete, less of those impervious surfaces. The more turf grass we bring back, the cooler we keep these urban and suburban areas. And they also help to reduce noise. So the gold medal species of these, the gold medal species of these low input grasses are the fine fescues. And do note that fine fescue is not one specific species, it's actually an umbrella of species. Creeping red fescue, hard fescue, sheep's fescue are a couple examples of these. And this is a turfgrass species that is fantastic for a home lawn setting. It has low fertility needs. You need to apply maybe like 1/8 the nitrogen that you would apply to Kentucky bluegrass by comparison. They're super slow growing. Even if you want to maintain your lawn at 2 or 3 inches, you only have to mow it once every 3 weeks, maybe once every 4 weeks. And I'll talk a little bit later on about no-mow fine fescue, where you can mow even less frequently. It does fantastic in both sun or shady settings, and it has fantastic drought tolerance. Do note that just because I say it has drought tolerance, during the establishment phase for fine fescue, that doesn't mean that you don't have to water it. So when this turfgrass is getting established, you still want to be applying water to the area, but after it's established, it can go 2 to 3 weeks without receiving rain, and it'll still be perfectly fine. Just note that during the establishment phase, still needs water. It's very winter hardy. It has quick germination. And even if you want to do some weed suppression, it's allelopathic. Allelopathic means it suppresses the establishment of other nearby weedy species. Do note that there are some drawbacks to fine fescue, the most important of which would be its low traffic tolerance. So let's say you're trying to get this established in an area where you have dogs running around all the time and your neighbors or friends or whoever, family members, are playing in that yard area, and maybe they're playing in cleats where there can be abrasion to the surface. You might want to have a companion grass alongside the fine fescue. So this doesn't mean you can't use it, you just want to mix it in with another grass species. The grass species that I like to mix fine fescue with most frequently are Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue. Tall fescue in particular is super low input and does much better with abrasion and traffic tolerance. So those can make a really great combination if you do have a little bit of traffic on your surface. So people are really interested in these no-mow fine fescue mixtures. And what's really great about fine fescue is the actual way that it grows. So if you think about Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue or really any other turfgrass species, it'll grow straight vertically, whether it's at 3 inches or 6 inches or 9 inches or whatever. With fine fescue, once it reaches 5 or so inches, it'll start to lay over itself, like in that picture you're seeing, and form kind of this nice, beautiful, wavy kind of look to it. And with that being the case, you only have to mow maybe once or twice a year, 2 or 3 times a year for sure. What you do want to be noted of is if you let that grass grow and it's out at 6 inches when you straighten it out rather than letting it lay over itself for 8 inches, you don't want to do this all in one pass where you cut it from 8 inches right back down to 3. You want to do this in a couple passes. So day 1, you cut that grass back from 8 to maybe 6 inches. And then day 2, you cut from 6 down to 4. And if you really want to get it low, the next day you cut it from 4 down to 3 inches. If you cut too much of that grass surface away, it's going to kind of shock the grass. You might risk killing the grass. You want to give it a little bit of time to recover. Here are some examples of no-mow mixtures in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. So that first picture is a boulevard alongside Minneapolis. And the picture on your right is right on the St. Paul campus at the University of Minnesota. So I saw that plot when I was in the U. I was in the turfgrass science lab, and we were looking at these fine fescue plots all the time. They do really fantastic, especially here in Minnesota where we need that winter hardiness. A little bit of feedback that I got about this presentation is people didn't want to just know about the planting types that we recommend. They want to know about how they can specifically get them in the ground. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can actually install a low input lawn. When it comes to lawn installation, there's 2 different options, seeding and sodding. I'll talk about the pros and cons of both. And as I'm talking about these, it seems like I prefer seeding to sodding. That's because I do. The reason for that is when you seed a lawn, you have a much greater option for the availability of species. With sod, it's generally Kentucky bluegrass or bust, which is great, but Kentucky bluegrass is a species you kind of have to baby. It really likes its water, it likes its nutrients, etc. With when you seed a lawn, you have the option to kind of find the turfgrass species that's best suited for your system. So if you have a shady area, you can use fine fescue. If you have a shady area where your dogs run and play, you can use a mix of fine fescue and tall fescue. So it's just really much more adaptable when you can use seed and get the exact right species. Seeding is also much less expensive. Sod is much more expensive on a per square foot basis. And with seeding, you find that you get stronger root development, especially if you let that turfgrass grow a little bit longer. So a general turfgrass care tip that I have for all of you is when you do your first mowing of the season, be patient. If you can let that turfgrass grow out to 4, 5, or 6 inches, the root systems below the surface are going to mirror that. So the longer you let the turfgrass grow that first time around, the longer the root systems will be. So what I would say is for your first mow from 6 down to 4 inches, wait a week, and then mow from about 4.5 inches down to 3 inches. That'll give you great root establishment and a really strong turfgrass system. With sod, there are some benefits for sure. You get rapid establishment. That's certainly what people are most interested in. There's no time lag between your purchase and a green lawn. Where I use them most frequently is on slopes. So on slopes, if you try to use seed, a lot of the time that seed will wash away in the first rain event, or it'll blow away if it's on a hill. Turfgrass sod is fantastic for sloped areas where you just want to get something in the ground. Sodding also isn't nearly as time dependent as seeding. We'll talk a bit later on about the best times to do a seeding. But if you say, I want my grass, I want it now, it's the middle of July, I want something green, sodding is a really great option. So this goes for establishing turfgrass, but it really goes for any planting you ever want to do in your life. I can't tell you how much I recommend getting a soil test. If you want to know about your landscape and what species, what plantings are best suited for it, there's no better $20 you can spend than a soil test. You'll get information about soil pH and if you have to do any treatments for that. You'll get information about nutrient levels like nitrogen and phosphorus. What you'll see most of the time is we have plenty of nitrogen and phosphorus in our soils. We don't really need to add too much fertilizer at all. You will be given a fertilizer recommendation and other recommendations. And what I really love to learn is that soil OM, or the percent of organic matter in the soil. You generally want at least 2% organic matter. And if that's not the case, you can use things like compost to up the organic matter in your surface before you start to get planted. A little bit about seeding, and specifically the timing of seeding. Late summer is a really great time to plant your lawn. The reason for that is it's all tied to temperature. Turfgrass in the northern climates grow best between the temperatures of 50 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So in mid-August and mid-September, our daily high temperatures are right in that range where it's perfect for our turfgrass. Really, anything north of 75 degrees is going to impart stress on our lawns and make it more difficult for our grass to grow. This will get you germination in the very same year. And I always like to get a little bit of a supplement with an overseeding the next year. So it's inevitable that you spread that turf grass, you see some germination in year one, but there's going to be some bare patches. So I always like to have some seed left over for an overseeding. If you seed in the late summer, you can overseed in the fall or the following spring. The second time period that I really love to seed is as a dormant seeding in the late fall. What you want to do is you do your seeding in early or mid-November when soil temperatures are right around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The beauty of this is that the ground isn't yet frozen and it's not warm to the point where your grass will germinate. You'll actually see germination the following spring, and what this does is it ensures that your grass starts growing as soon as possible in that spring. This really helps to reduce competition from nearby weeds. Here, your supplemental seeding, your supplemental overseeding will occur in the late summer. So you let that turf grass get in the spring, you see where the patchy spots are, and you overseed in the late fall to supplement it. And do note that snow is not an issue at all. Snow cover actually aids establishment. It helps to keep the seed in place over the winter. So a little bit more about the timing of seeding and the benefits of a dormant seeding. Some people ask, why not wait till winter? The reason for that is if we seed when the temperatures are below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, our ground is going to be frozen and the seed isn't going to be necessarily making contact with the soil. It's going to be making contact with an ice layer just above the soil. If we want to have our best germination results, we want to get in before the ground is frozen. On the other side of things, I often get the question, why not do that season early in the spring, right after snow melt in late March or early April? And the reason for that is you already have weeds starting to germinate, starting to accumulate what we call degree days. So if you do a dormant seeding, the turf grass has a little bit of a head start in comparison to the weeds that are nearby. So how to actually spread the seed? I like to spread the seed at half the recommended rate in perpendicular directions. So a common seeding rate is 4 to 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Here we'll use 5 pounds as an example. So what I'll do is I'll do one pass north and south, 2.5 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And then I'll do another pass perpendicular to that, another 2.5 pounds east-west. That'll give you the best germination results. That picture on the top right shows you what it would start to look like as the turf grass is starting to get established. After you spread the seed, a light rake is really useful. You want to still keep the seed at the top or near the top of the soil bed. We're not trying to bury our seeds. We just want a very light covering of soil. And finally, what's super important is directly after you seed, you do one very heavy watering. I'm talking like 4+ inches of water. And, if you apply an hour or so, the best way to do it is if you have a rain gauge, or if you can even apply put a tuna can right in your lawn, get your sprinkler going and see when that tuna can has collected 4 inches of water. That tells you that your lawn area has gotten soaked enough where it'll be healthy and ready to germinate. After that first deep watering, you can cut back to light, frequent waterings. I would say if you could do 3 1-inch waterings per week or even every other day, that'll be best for your plant germination. Sodding by comparison, so now we're going to transition over from seeding a lawn to sodding a lawn. The best quality sod you can get is new sod. So the second that sod gets delivered to you, you want to get it planted in the ground. The reason for that is once that sod is cut, the root system of the sod starts to dry out. So you want to moisten the soil and get that sod in the ground instantly into a moist surface. As best you can as you're laying out that sod, you want to match up the edges and fill any cracks you see with soil. So it's inevitable that as you lay down that sod, there's going to be some spots where the edges don't match up perfectly. Just fill in a little bit of a little bit of soil between the cracks. After that, we're going to follow the same watering practices I recommended for establishing from seed. And you're going to want to wait 14 days or so and then do what we call the tug test. This will let you know if your sod is taken. So after 14 days, you're going to just gently pull on the newly sodded area. And if you feel a little bit of resistance, that means you've had success in your planting. The sodding has taken to its new surface. Finally, how do we maintain one of these low input lawns? If you want to maintain one of these lawns sustainably and really reduce your environmental footprint, your green footprint, I would recommend using a reel mower. Reel mowers, they are a little bit more labor intensive, but they don't require the burning of fossil fuels. Also, adjusting the height of your plantings can be really great, especially for bee lawns. But when you're doing a bee lawn, which I'll talk about in just a moment, if you adjust the height of your lawnmower to go up to 4.5 inches and cut back to 3 inches, you'll see more flowers in your planting. So if you're looking to get flowers in your lawn area, let it grow just a little bit longer. Here's an example of what that would look like. Just a little bit taller grass, letting it grow to 4.5 inches and cutting back to 3 inches. Do note that there can be some issues with these no-mow lawns, and you just want to be a responsible steward of your landscape. So the main issue that we see is heavy thatch buildup. So heavy thatch can result in brown patches in no-mow areas, and that's a result of too much nitrogen. So what we would recommend is right after that green up in the spring, use a dethatching machine to pull out the dead leaves and the other dead vegetation without disturbing the soil. And also look for gaps in your no-mow areas, sow in a little bit more seed, keep that area densely planted. So I've probably talked more about grass today than most people have heard in a lifetime, but if you want even more information about grass, the University of Minnesota's Turfgrass website is a fantastic resource. That's where I got all my knowledge from. There's a really great extension arm of the UMN Turfgrass program. So these resources, I can't recommend them enough. Go in there, check them out, do what you can. So fescues are going to be our most grass-like option, but there's more kind of grass-similar options you could think about using as well, particularly sedges and native grasses. So some sedge species that grow similar to the fine fescue turf, but are even more sustainable are Pennsylvania sedge, fox sedge, ivory sedge, and plains oval sedge. And just as you would with your turf grass, it's all about finding the right species for the right setting. So Penn sedge is a really great option for sunny, dry conditions. And when I say Penn sedge, that's just short for Pennsylvania sedge. Here's some Pennsylvania sedge right in an urban landscape, right by what looks to be someone's little garden area. And there's even options for shady areas. So plains oval sedge and ivory sedge do really well with a little bit of shade. So there's options for you. It's all about picking the right plant for the right setting. Some other native grass species to think about are prairie June grass, Claria macrantha. That's a species that the University of Minnesota is doing a lot of research on. They think this is a really high potential species. Some other species to think about are buffalo grass and tufted hairgrass, which are typical turf species down in the south, and even native grasses like blue grama and side oats grama. What's important to note about native grasses is they're going to be more costly and form less densely than your turf grass species. So it's going to be more of an investment on your part, but there's going to be really a long-term gain in terms of sustainability, where these require much less maintenance, much less water. So it's a long-term investment. So I'm going to stop a little bit of there, take a quick drink of water. I'll launch a new poll, I believe, and I'm even going to look at the questions. Just give me 1 second to get a drink of water. Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to check out our second poll here. Oh, that one's not getting launched till just a little bit later down the road. So I'll look at the questions we've gotten. So Judy says, doesn't seed wash away with heavy watering for the first watering? So Judy, it will if you're on a slope, but if you're on an even area, it should stay in place. What I like to recommend doing is if you're afraid of that seed washing away, a
Yeah.
germination blanket could be in your best interest.
Are
If you're
those like
not,
the burlap ones?
what was that? Can you say that again?
Is it like a burlap? Is that the seed blanket? Is like that burlap?
Yep, that'll do the trick. Yep,
Okay.
and it'll look kind of like straw. It's just like a thin blanket. You can even get biodegradable ones, and they help to keep the seed in place, and they even help to help the area retain moisture. So I
Okay.
highly recommend using those. If you were to drive by the St. Paul campus right now, you would see some areas covered in those blankets because they're doing some establishments right now.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that's the only question we've gotten so far about turf grass. Probably talk a little bit too much about turf, but I think it's really important to know when and where it works. Okay. Oh, there we go. So now we're going to move on to my absolute favorite option, and I am totally biased because this was the focal point of my graduate research. We're going to talk about pollinator-friendly lawns. And here what you want to think about is, are you okay with not having that picture-perfect, cliched green lawn? You also want to think about how frequently you use your lawn area, and if you kind of want to find that nice middle ground where you can still have recreation and still support your pollinators. And finally, the main thing that I like to think about is, do you want to turn your lawn into a functioning ecosystem? Because what's really beautiful about these pollinator lawns is there's still room for recreation. It still has that grass-like feel visually, but you're also putting in some great forage for your pollinators. Something that you certainly want to think of is you're no longer going to treat those flowers in the lawn, in the landscape, as weeds. Now we're starting to think of them as bee food. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to do a total redesign on the typical American turf lawn. So we want to go from that picture of the left where we kind of have a monoculture, a mixture of different turf grass species, to the picture of the right where we have this beautiful, or at least in my opinion, beautiful matrix of low-growing flowers and turf grass. Something that I say again and again is I don't know how we became convinced that turf grass is more beautiful than flowers. I think that if we can bring those purple, white, yellow flowers back into the landscape, not only do we provide food and forage for our pollinators, I think they bring beauty back as well. So I want to talk about the function of a bee lawn first from a human perspective, where these are super low maintenance. So because we're using fine fescue grass in a bee lawn, they require very little mowing, very little watering, and very little fertilizing. And also, now that we're going to view flowers in the landscape as bee food rather than a nuisance, we can completely take out the weeding. You might want to do a little bit of a spot weeding if you see something particularly aggressive, like an English plantain, for example. But for the most part, we're going to think of our flowers in the lawn as bee food. And finally, what we're able to do is maintain the aesthetics and function. So you can still play on these surfaces, you can still walk through these surfaces. They just now also provide some forage for our pollinators. I like to think of the advantages from a community-wide focus as well. So there's this really great push for local food production in the forms of urban gardening and urban farms. And there's this really great study from the Chicago area that found that converting just 5% of a lawn can improve local pollination. So if you want to help those urban gardeners and your local urban farmers, local farmers market, doing a little bit of a lawn conversion can help their yields. So just a little food for thought if you're into urban local food production. So I feel like I've talked enough about things from the human perspective. One of the things that my advisor when I was a grad student always used to say to me was, you're thinking like a human when I need you to think like a bee. So now I'm going to encourage all of you to join me in thinking like a bee for a little bit. So now we're going to talk about what makes these flowers great from the bee's perspective. So first, they need to be able to establish in Minnesota soils. Two, they need to serve as high quality forage for wild bees. What that means is they have pollen that's full of protein content and nectar that's full of nectar that's full of high quality sugar. And finally, when we can, we want to incorporate native flowers. There's this basic rule of thumb that says native flowers support native wildlife. So we want to try as hard as we can to support native flowers. What you'll see here is I've included a picture of creeping thyme on your right. What you might not have seen is there is a bee on that. So I'm going to circle it for you. So this is a little sweat bee, a little Lasioglossum bee. And they are all over these creeping thyme flowers. So you are going to have to look a little bit harder to find the bees on these, but they're there, I promise you. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the species. So self-heal is one of my absolute favorites. The reason for that is it's a native species. I've seen butterflies and skippers on this species, and also it is absolutely beautiful. The blooms have these deep violet purple colors to them that are just gorgeous. What you will notice is it has these medium-sized, what we call whorled blooms. And when I say a whorled bloom, I'm talking about the neck of the flower. So the flower has a little bit of a long neck that's somewhat restricted in terms of the pollinators that can support. So when I started my graduate research, I thought I would see strictly large bees on this flower. And that was true to an extent where large bees like bumblebees were all over the prunella, all over the self-heal. But we actually also saw teeny tiny bees, really small bees, just like that Lasioglossum in the previous picture. And how they got to access the rewards in the self-heal is, and I kid you not, it is the cutest thing in the world. They crawl in through the neck of the flower, grab their nectar, grab their pollen, crawl out, and fly on their way. So this is a really great forage source for both small and large pollinators alike. Self-heal is primarily a nectar source. It does have some pollen available to bees, but it's really the nectar that the pollinators are looking for. And what's fantastic about this flower is it does well in both full and part sun. So if you have a little bit of shade in your landscape, Prunella vulgaris does really well with that kind of part shade, kind of moist, kind of wet soils. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, at least from the pollinator's point of view, is creeping thyme. And here, rather than having these larger, kind of more restrictive blooms, creeping thyme has smaller, wide open blooms. And this lends itself nicely to those really teeny tiny bees. So a Lasioglossum bee, which is that black metallic bee I showed you before. Also these absolutely gorgeous Ogochlorella bees. So another kind of sweat bee with this green iridescent color. They are all over creeping thyme. They're the bee species that I saw most frequently on creeping thyme. From the human perspective, just a little bit, I promise I prefer to think like a bee, is creeping thyme has fantastic drought and winter tolerance. Here in Minnesota, I don't need to explain why winter hardiness is important, but creeping thyme does fantastic through our difficult winters. Also, and this is more of a kind of an old wives' tale, I've heard people say that it acts as a natural deer deterrent. So if you're looking for a plant that can help to kind of ward away the deers, apparently deers don't like the smell and the taste of the vegetation, so using it as a border plant can be a really nice option to fend the deer off. So finally, a species that I'm just going to gush over is Dutch white clover. And the reason for that is just the sheer diversity of bees that utilize this flower. So it has this open, medium-sized blooms that lends itself well to small, medium, and large pollinators alike. If you're a small bee, you grab one petal, that's your landing surface, you reach down, you grab your food. If you're a large bee, you use the entire flower as your landing pad. Fantastic source of both pollen and nectar. I cannot say enough great things about Dutch white clover. Even if you're looking to improve just your general lawn health, it's a natural nitrogen fixer. So that just means even less nitrogen that you have to apply to your lawn surface. So with the Dutch white clover and the creeping thyme, you may have noticed that these are two non-native species that I recommended. So I just want to give a little bit of kind of some outsider testimonials on just how great these species are. So Neil Samardzija from the National Park Service says of Dutch white clover that Dutch white clover has been in the US for a long time and is more or less naturalized. I generally don't see it outcompeting native species. And what Neil did is he pretty much just gave the definition of a naturalized plant, where not all non-native species are created equally. What we normally think of when we think about non-native plants are the invasive species, the species that competitively exclude natives. Dutch white clover is on the other end of the spectrum where it's really not that aggressive and it's been in our landscapes for so long where it kind of works nicely with our native plants and it provides great forage to our bees. The Minnesota Native Landscape Arboretum says that while non-native flowers may be aggressive, they can still be very useful. Dutch white clover, Trifolium repens, and creeping thyme, Thymus orphyllum, are two species that benefit pollinators and will flower in a mowed lawn. Another species to consider is common violet, Viola sororia. So you probably see them in your landscapes whether you like them or not, and I think they're just absolutely gorgeous. They have that deep purple color. You can also get them in white, and they're early season bloomers. I love seeing things blooming early in the season. They bloom April through June, and they do really well in both sun and shade. Super resilient. They mix beautifully with turf grass, as you can see in this picture. and they're really valuable to our native skippers. So if you're thinking beyond bees, native skippers are another kind of life group that we want to support. And common violet is an incredibly important host plant for our native skippers. I want to talk a little bit about how to get these established. So I'm going to do a quick example of how to establish a pollinator lawn through an overseeding. So do note that an overseeding is only possible if you have a healthy turfgrass lawn. If you have a turfgrass lawn that's covered with creeping Charlie or some other aggressive non-native species, it's going to be really difficult for our bee lawn flowers to compete with this. So I would not recommend an overseeding in that circumstance. But if you do have a healthy turfgrass lawn, here's what I would recommend. Step 1, you mow that lawn as short as you possibly can. In step 2, after mowing, you rake away the clippings. What you're trying to do here is expose as much soil as you possibly can. That way, when you get to step 3, spreading the seed is making contact with the soil bed rather than getting caught up in the turf grass. From there, all you have to do is keep the area nice and moist until you see it start to sprout. And then once you see germination, once you see evidence of plant establishment, you could cut back on your watering and completely stop fertilizing. I would say it's good to water maybe once every other day before establishment, once a week in the first year after establishment, and in years 2 and on, you only have to water during times of drought. So if you don't get a natural rain event for 10 days or so, then you would want to apply water to the surface. Another maintenance consideration is mowing. Since we want to get flowers in the landscape, and a lot of these flowers bloom right at 2.5, 3 inches, I would recommend letting the landscape grow out to 4.5 inches and cutting back to 3 inches. Also, please, please, please do not apply herbicides to these surfaces. Those will kill your flowers, so if you absolutely have to, hand weed any plants that you see there that you don't like and want to get rid of. So I'll stop there before I talk about option 3, perennial ground cover. I'll encourage you to put in any questions you might have about bee lawns. I'm going to get another quick drink of water. I'm also going to open up a new poll. I can never ask too many questions about these pollinator lawns. So I want to know which of the lawn flowers I mentioned are your favorites in the pollinator lawns. I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that while I look at your questions. And do note this is a multiple choice question where you could feel free to choose more than one species that you are interested in. So Jen and Emily ask, what would you recommend doing when your lawn is full of creeping Charlie? So just like, I believe it was Judy who put it in the chat, just like Judy said, I would recommend using chelated iron. It's a really great and safe way to get creeping Charlie out. What you're going to want to do is make sure you follow the best management practices for applying that. You're probably going to have to do a couple treatments staggered in application, so maybe 2 applications over a 3-week period, or maybe even 3 applications over a 3-week period. But if you follow the recommended practices, so spraying only outside of bee foraging hours, spraying when there's low wind, it will be safe for pollinators, and it's a great way to remove creeping Charlie. Kristen asks, will we get stung by bees? So Kristen, what I would recommend is wearing closed-toed shoes when you're out there. So the last thing a bee wants to do is interact with you. Really all it wants is the food there. It wants to get the flowers. Bees are not aggressive by nature. The circumstance that would make you most likely or most exposed to a bee sting is if you were to accidentally step on a bee. It would get scared and defensive and sting you out of its defensive nature. So if you wear closed-toed shoes, that would really reduce the likelihood of getting stung. And Sonia says, would taking plugs out of our lawn be a good way to do the overseeding? Sonia, give me a little bit more information here. What do you have plugs of? Are you talking about like plug plants that you've installed? Or are you talking about like aerating the area and taking plugs of soil out to improve the flow of nutrients, improve the flow of water, etc.? So you can put that in either the Q&A window or the chat window, and I'll get to you. Yeah, Sonia says taking plugs of grass out. And that's something that a turf grass student, that a previous master student, his name is Ian Lane, that he looked into. He wanted to see if aerating a surface before doing the seeding would benefit the establishment. And what he found was that it varied from species to species. So at a minimum, it's neutral, it has no impact, but some species do greatly benefit from aeration before seeding. So I would say, yes, if you can aerate the area, definitely do an aeration before seeding. Get those plugs out. Okay. And one more question from Judy. Judy says, I have a buffer with all native plants that I put in last year. It covers 3/4 of my yard, and the remaining I want to do bee lawn mixed with perennial flowers. That sounds gorgeous. Will these two landscapings work together? I do have a photo, but I don't know if you would see if I showed you. So let me see something. You might be able to upload a picture of it to the chat window. Let's see. No, it doesn't look like you can do that today, unfortunately. I guess it's not available during a webinar. But Judy, what I would say is, since some of the species can be a tad bit aggressive, particularly the Dutch white clover, what you might want to do is utilize edging between the garden plants and the bee lawn. So if you put in a brick edge or maybe like some plastic edging, that'll make it much more difficult for the Dutch white clover to get across and compete with your native perennials. So doing that can limit their interplay. But I would say they can totally work together. Absolutely, just use edging.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so I'm gonna end that poll I just ran, and it looks like 50% of us are interested in Dutch white clover, self-heal, and creeping thyme, and 5 out of 8 of us are liking the look of a common violet within a lawn. I love it too. I love all 3. Oh, one more question trickled in. Sonia says, I live in Northeast Minneapolis and have clay soil. What are some good plants? So Sonia, here, water-loving plants that like wet soil are your best friend, and also plants that are just highly adaptive. So within a bee lawn, I would say do not use creeping thyme. Creeping thyme, like sandy soil, well-drained soils. So you're going to want to use the Dutch white clover and the self-heal. In fact, if you go over to Audubon Park, if you're in Northeast Mile, it can't be more than a few miles away. I installed a bee lawn there for my graduate research, and it is full of Dutch clover and self-heal. What I would recommend doing is if you can mix in a little bit of compost in with that clay, it'll be really nice for the plant establishment. Okay, so now we're going to talk about perennial ground cover. Give me 1 second to check how we're doing on time. Oh, great, it's just past 7. We have plenty of time to talk about all these beautiful options. So here you're going to want to start, you're going to want to kind of keep asking more of those questions we've been talking about. So how frequently do you use your yard area? If you use your yard area a lot, you probably don't want to do a complete perennial ground cover replacement. But if you're not using your lawn area too frequently and you really want to maximize the ecological impact of your landscape, then perennial ground cover might be perfect for you. Also, how much time do you have for hands-on maintenance and land care? These plantings are going to be a little sensitive in the first 2 or 3 growing seasons. They're going to need some weeding in order to get established nicely. So you want to make sure that you have the time to do a little bit of weeding. All it takes is maybe 1 hour once a month in that first year of planting, but then you can have a beautiful kind of like a remnant prairie in your own yard. And of course, you want to ask yourself, are you okay with a non-traditional look? Personally, I think that garden plantings are far more beautiful than turf grass. So I'm hoping that we can make this the new norm in Minneapolis, or really across the entire state of Minnesota. So considerations, how much foot traffic, how do you use your lawn area? If you want to do work in a boulevard, does it receive winter salt? How much traffic does it get? Does it get baked by the sun? These are all going to impact the plants that you select for a boulevard planting, and I'll talk about a boulevard planting later on. What kind of soil do you have? So Judy mentioned that she has clay soil. That'll mean you want to use plants that like wet soils. If you have sandy soil, you want to use plants that are well adapted to well-drained areas. And I can't stress this enough, the most successful plantings will always take these into consideration. Critical thinking, really thinking about your landscape is always going to lend itself nicely to a successful planting. So a few areas that are really great options for perennial ground cover One is the Hell Strip or the Boulevard. I'll talk more about that later and why I think this is the perfect setting for a planting. Another would be along challenging slopes. So as one of the residents in this talk noted, it can be really difficult to get grass established along a slope. Some of that grass is just going to wash away. Even if you use a germination blanket, it could still be a challenge. If you could just plug in some potted plants or plug in some plug plants, that's a really great alternative. Right-of-ways, the Minnesota Department of Transportation is already doing an incredible job of this, where they're converting something like 40% of right-of-ways to pollinator forage. So let's follow the DOT and get that going, make it more of a norm. Sonia, I love to see that you're right by Audubon Park. If you go like 1 month from now, it should be covered in Dutch white clover and self-heal. I'm starting to second guess that because I think that they did construction to the area where I installed the bee lawn. But if you live close to it, it might be good to go over and check. So I'm going to run over a few different options for these perennial gardens, for these perennial ground covers that we can use. The first of which is a native pocket planting. And this is a planting option that Bowser, that the Lawns Leggings program is really, really trying to push. And the reason for that is they're small, they're easy to maintain, but they are diverse and so effective for pollinator conservation. All we're asking you to do is dedicate a small section of your lawn area to pollinators. I'm talking as small as 10 square feet, 25 square feet, and this will make a perfectly suitable rest stop like I was talking about earlier for your pollinators. As far as installation goes, we encourage you all to use organic site preparation methods like sheet mulching or solarization. And if you want to learn more about that, the Xerxes Society has a really great fact sheet all about organic site preparation. But really what you're doing with a native pocket planting is anywhere where you remove the turf grass and replace it with native flowers, that is a native plant pocket planting, and the bees will surely thank you for that. A rain garden is also a really great option for these areas. Speaking of rain gardens, I'll talk about them really quick. So if you want to go even beyond pollinator conservation and think about water conservation, a rain garden is a really great way to reduce stormwater runoff off of your landscape. So rain gardens aren't all too different from a typical garden. The main difference being we've dug out a small depression in the area. You'll see that there's a sloping area leading to the flat bottom or the basin. And those slopes are constructed in a very particular manner. They're 3-to-1 side slopes, or for every 3 inches you go towards the center of the planting, you go 1 inch deep. And all we're trying to do is get 6 inches deep for this planting. If you live in Northeast Minneapolis where clay soils are super common, you don't even have to go that deep. 3 to 4 inches, we're just trying to collect a little bit of storm water, let it drain out, and reduce our stormwater runoff, really improving our blue thumb in this area. These areas do have inlets and outlets. What those do is they collect some stormwater and slow the rate at which stormwater enters the rain garden. Super important. And you'll see it there in bold letters with exclamation points. We want your rain gardens to have a flat bottom. This will make sure water distributes evenly throughout the planted area. So what I'm going to do now is I'll run a little bit of a video to show you just how simple rain garden installation can be. So they start by digging out those side slopes. They're using a tool called a sod cutter. So they cut out that turf grass, and then they start digging out the basin. What's really interesting is look at just how many wheelbarrows of soil they remove. Even though they're only going 4 or 6 inches deep, that is a ton of soil to remove, and that's where the beauty of the water conservation comes in. After they do the basin, they'll do the edges of the planting and start working on those 3-to-1 side slopes, making sure everything's even and good to go before they get started with planting. And before they even plant the area, they mulch the area. The mulch helps for weed suppression and water retention. Before they get those plants in the ground, they lay them out, and they lay them out to make sure that they have an even spread of plants throughout the growing surface. Now they're spreading out that mulch, getting those plants installed, making sure that there's even plant density throughout the planted area. It's really nice to pack in the soil really tightly around the plants as you're getting them established. You'll see the individuals digging out a little swale and filling it in with rocks and some dirt. What that does is it'll slow the rate at which water enters the planted area. So here the swale is their inlet, and bada boom, it's as simple as that. 1.5 minutes, you have your new rain garden. We can all do it this weekend. So of course, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Seeing it in the time lapse is always a little bit simpler, but it really is something that you could do in a day or two, especially if you have family or friends that are able to help. Obviously, interacting with friends is going to be limited during COVID-19 considerations, but if you can get a few extra hands out there that you can interact with safely, installing a rain garden can be a really nice day event for a day. Another type of planting that I really want to talk about are these boulevard gardens. So the reason boulevard gardens are a fantastic option for those of us that are kind of ecologically minded is the way our boulevard gardens are currently constructed are kind of a mess from an ecological point of view, where there's two things that are particularly wrong with them. First, they're mounded, and second, they're planted with turf grass. And in the green industry, we tend to call turf grass green concrete. The reason why this is a problem is during a rain event, that turf grass is only going to collect a very limited amount of water, and since the landscape is mounded, that water is going to run right over the top of the turf grass, over the curb, into whatever nearby impervious surface there is nearby, often a street. And that water will travel through the street, through a storm drain, into whatever nearby body of water, lake, river, etc., is near you, contaminating the body of water. So what we recommend doing is two things. First, lowering the height of the boulevard till it's about 2 to 3 inches below the height of the curb cut and the sidewalk. And three, rather than planting it with turf grass, try planting it with native perennials. This will be great for the pollinators. This will be great for stormwater conservation. Something else that I want to talk about with this is it's a really great way to build community. I'm starting to see more and more of these boulevard gardens, and if you could put signage in there, it shows individuals that no, this is not a weedy area. This is an area that I'm altering intentionally for the good of our community. Oh, excuse me. That last example, that's an example of a boulevard bioswale that we installed in North Minneapolis, right by Redeemer Church. So it's planted with wild strawberry. So now the steps of installing a boulevard bioswale. So these are pictures that I took just this past year. We installed, I believe, right around 35 boulevard bioswales in North Minneapolis, and I'll tell you exactly how we did it. So first, we remove the turf. You can use a dingo or a skid steer for this, or you could do it the good old-fashioned way with a shovel. After that, you want to replace the turf with, you want to shape the soil until it's about 4 inches below the curb cut of the sidewalk. So I know the last slide I said 2 inches. But the reason that we removed to 4 inches below initially is because we're going to incorporate compost in the mix. So you get the soil down to 4 inches, and then you incorporate compost until you're at that 2 to 3 inch height below the curb cut and sidewalk. So after you add the compost, you're going to add 2 inches of mulch. Here you should be maybe 1 inch below the height of the curb cut, or maybe even dead even with the curb cut. That's fine. The mulch is not going to limit your ability to capture that stormwater. It's actually going to help because mulch is great for stormwater retention. So 1 to 2 inches of mulch is highly recommended. And once you've mulched the area, then you're finally ready to install your vegetation. You just move that mulch aside with your trowel or with your hands. You dig out a hole equal to the size of the planting that you want to get installed, the root ball of the planting that is, and then you plug it in right into the soil. Another planting variation that I want to talk about is lakeshore plantings. And with the previous examples I talked about how stormwater moves throughout our urban landscapes. In a city, it has to travel all through those streets and sewer systems before it gets into the lake. With lakeshore planting, your planting is the only buffer. So here we really want to emphasize the importance of using plants with deep root systems. Something else to consider is that your soil moisture is going to differ as you get closer or further away from the planting. So the closer you are to the planting, the wetter the soil. The further away you are from the closer you are to the lake, the wetter the soil. And the further you are from the lake, the drier the soil. So this is just something that you want to take into consideration as you do your plant selection. Wet plants near the lake, dry plants further from the lake, and mesic plants kind of in between. A second planting type that you want to talk about as you kind of think about how you can replace turf is pollinator beneficial trees and shrubs. What I love about trees and shrubs is they provide an early season burst of blooms for our pollinators. So if you think about what's blooming early in the spring, it's a lot of our trees and shrubs. Apple trees, dogwoods, basswoods, even shrubs like cranberries, edibles like a blueberry, raspberry, or cranberry. Great for our bees, early season bursts of blooms, and even some edible options for you. Something else that I really love about trees and shrubs is they create these gorgeous canopy layers, where I love seeing a mix of perennials, shrubbery, and trees within a landscape. Provides some really great visual aesthetics, and also kind of different layers where different pollinators can access the forage. The fourth type of planting that I want to talk about is a pollinator meadow. And here with a pollinator meadow, we're kind of saying, I'm okay sacrificing my personal use for a lawn area. I want to totally maximize the ecological impact that I have within my residential area. Now, what we're essentially doing is we're turning our lawn into a restored prairie or a pollinator meadow. So here what we're creating is a tight matrix of native grasses and low-growing perennials that can be used as an alternative to turf grass. We want to do a complete replacement of turf, and do keep in mind this requires a significant investment. An investment in the form of time, in the form of planting, and even financially. But the benefit here is we're able to maximize our ecological impact. We're going to make those bees real darn happy. When we install a pollinator meadow, I don't want this to be too difficult a task. I still want this to be feasible. So what I recommend doing is installing a pollinator meadow bite by bite. If you're looking to take on several hundred square feet or even an acre, try to make this, feasible. Do it in steps. Think of it as installing a kind of string of pocket plantings where you're doing maybe 50 or 100 square feet once a week, once a month, etc. Until over time you have this really long, beautifully connected pollinator meadow in your lawn area. When it comes to installation, we do want you to still consider using organic site preparation, sheet mulching, and solarization, and also think critically about how you source your plants. Utilizing a mixture of seed, plugs, and larger plants, potted plants, can really be in your best interest. The larger plants give you those gorgeous instant blooms established year one. The seeds are your most cost-effective option, but they take a little bit longer to get established. And plugs are right in the middle, where they'll establish and bloom after 1 or 2 years, but they're just much less costly than these larger plants, than potted plants. So now I want to take a little bit of a break. If you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A or in the chat window, and then we'll get into installation and maintenance. So Sonia says, if you live in Minneapolis, I believe that a number of neighborhood associations will pay for much of the expense of installing a rain garden by Metro Blooms. That is great to hear. I'm glad that they did that for you, Sonia. Let us know what neighborhood association you interacted with. That way you can share that beautiful knowledge with everyone. Let me check the Q&A window real quick to see if there's any other questions that we've received. Yep, here's one from Bob. Bob says, we have an east-facing front lawn with a large tree, I think a Norway maple. It creates a lot of shade and even grass suffers. It seems antithetical to cut down a tree for an environmental project. On the other hand, it is not a native tree and not a very attractive one. I'd like a perennial ground cover, a full-on glorious pollinator meadow. Any advice about the tree? So Bob, I think you had it right when you said, do not take out that tree. Trees do an incredible job in the world of water conservation. If you think about the root systems associated with a tree, they are so dense and so complex and so deep, they are capturing tons of stormwater runoff. So I would say, even though it's a non-native, let that tree grow. What I would recommend doing is, there's plenty of plants that do well in shade. So I would recommend trying to install a shade garden nearby your shade tree. So you should have all received a folder full of documents relative to planting, and one of them should be a list of shade plantings that work really nicely in shady areas. So Bob, definitely check out that list of shade plants. They should do really nicely for you. Also, some bee lawn flowers do nicely in shade. If you want to throw in some Dutch white clover and some self-heal in shade to part shade areas, that should work nicely as well. Judy says the Rice Creek Watershed District paid for my initial native buffer garden, which involves the drainage ditch. I talked to my neighbor and he submitted for the grant. He received it, so we're going to continue the drainage ditch and include native perennials. I love to always be thinking about local grant opportunities. You generally can receive more money and have a higher likelihood of getting selected. So always be on the lookout for local grant opportunities. Okay, so now we're going to pivot and talk a little bit about installation and maintenance. Everything from removing your existing plants, whether it's an invasive plant or turf grass, how we can replenish the soil, and also some ongoing maintenance to apply to the surface. So first step is how are we going to get rid of that sod? How are we going to get rid of that turf grass? And as I go through different options for this, know that there's always going to be some investment. It could be money, it could be labor, it could be time. I'll go through different options where each is an instance. So if you don't mind sacrificing some labor, using a sod cutter or a sod kicker could be in your best interest. A sod kicker is what we saw in that rain garden installation video, where using a blade and a foot-powered device, we're using that blade to remove the turf grass. This is a labor-intensive project, especially if you're trying to do several hundred square feet, but it's a very cost-effective way to reimagine your landscape. Renting a sod cutter is also a really great option. If you go to like Ready Rents or some tool rental service, I think Toro might even let you borrow one. Renting a sod cutter is not too expensive and it's much easier. So think about renting or borrowing a sod kicker or a sod cutter for getting your grass removed. So now we're going to think about sacrificing time. And the way you could do that is through solarization. I'll talk about solarization briefly, but if you want an in-depth analysis on what goes into a solarization, check out the Xerces Society's guide on organic site preparation methods. They talk about solarization in really great depth. But with a solarization, what you do is you cover your lawn area or the area that you want to convert in a sheet of plastic. Often black plastic or clear plastic is in your best interest. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of treat that area like an oven. You're going to let it collect heat over time. The sunnier the area, the quicker this moves. But generally, if you give it 3 months or so, that's enough time to let the area soak all that heat, kill the vegetation underneath the plastic. And after 3 months or so, you remove that plastic, you scrape away, you rake away the old pre-existing plantings, and you plant into your new clear surface. I would say if you can, try and time this so you're installing your planting in the late summer when the high temps are right around 60, 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Those are ideal growing temps for our native plants. Now I'll transition and talk a little bit about sheet mulching. And do not worry about copying down all these steps one by one. I'll go over them in much better depth one at a time. So step one of sheet mulching, or what I like to call lawn lasagna, is cut it down. Cut that turf grass as short as possible and leave your clippings. These are a really nice source of nitrogen. When you slash your vegetation, leave the vegetation but remove woody materials. So if you're seeing sticks and twigs and branches, get those out of there. Those will those degrade too slowly. They'll kind of mess up your sheet mulching. Step two is spread molasses throughout the area. What I want you to do is mix a 1/4 cup of molasses with 2 gallons of water and spread that over every 300 square feet you want to convert. So if you're looking to do a 1,000 square foot area, you're looking at right around 3/4 of a cup of molasses with 6 gallons of water. And the reason that molasses is so good for these areas is they are like, they're like regenerative fuel for the soil. They're really great for the soil microorganisms underneath in the soil surface. And what we're learning more and more is that life really begins in the soil. It's not at the vegetation. The soil supports microorganisms, the soil supports the vegetation. So if you create a healthy soil layer, it's going to fix everything from there up, all the other trophic layers that are dependent on that soil surface. After you've done that, you want to add your first layer of compost. It could be as thin as a 1/4 inch, as thick as 1 inch of compost. You just want to get your first primary layer of compost in the ground. Do be careful about where you source your compost from. Many big box stores carry pasteurized compost that's been heated to the point where the bacteria and fungi in the compost are no longer active, and that's no good. Make sure that you get compost from a local source if you can, a high quality compost that hasn't been heated and has all that beneficial bacteria and fungi. The next step is applying the cardboard. You want to cover this area in cardboard, remove any inorganic materials from the cardboard like labels, and then what you want to do is get it 2 to 3 inches so that there's no bare spots. Overlap like crazy. And once you've done that, soak it so that it holds in place. I mean, really drench that cardboard so it sticks together. After the cardboard, you're going to want to add another inch of soil and compost, an inch thick for sure, and then you're ready to get your plants going. So you could do crimson clover, oats, buckwheat, whatever plant you want to do over the winter. What's really common is doing an annual for winter coverage, and then the next spring, you get your permanent plants in the ground. As far as sod removal goes, people sometimes want to use herbicides, and if they have to use an herbicide, we want to recommend some safe herbicide options. So chelated iron is a really great option. Acetic acid, using eugenol or citric acid can be really nice. What you really want to do is make sure that you're refraining from using non-selective herbicides. So make sure that we're not using those broad spectrum pesticides. The more specific a chemical we can use, the better. You also want to wait a couple weeks for those chemicals to get out of the soil system and then establish your new plants. So now we're going to talk about how we can replenish the soil. I can't stress this enough. The soil is where life begins. If you have healthy soil, you'll have healthy plants and healthy food webs as a result. So a little bit about the soil structure. So if you have poor quality soil, like maybe you have clay, or maybe you have sand that dries out really quickly, adding compost is always recommended. And compost is just decayed organic matter that functions similarly to fertilizer. Where compost provides benefits is 1, moisture retention, 2, reducing compaction. Especially in urban and suburban areas, our soils can be highly compacted, which makes it really difficult for roots to penetrate. Compost helps reduce the risk of erosion. That's tied right to compaction, where compacted soils have water move really easily over the top of it. And they also really encourage soil biodiversity. They're really great for the beneficial bacteria and fungi. Organic matter is the key to that. I mentioned the idea of compacted versus decompacted soils. So decompacting that soil with compost is really great for root establishment. So on the left, you see how deep roots can establish with compacted soils, just a few centimeters, versus when you have decompacted soils, we're talking feet into the ground. So decompacting your soil, adding some compost, really fantastic for root establishment for your plants. And when we remediate that soil and improve its health, we improve the ability of food webs to establish as a result. So you improve the organic matter in the soil, you bring back the plants, you bring back the plants, you bring back the small insects, and when you bring back those small insects, you bring back the birds and small mammals that feed on them. So remember, when we improve the soil, we're not solely improving the soil, we're rebuilding food webs. A little factoid just to convince you on just how important soil health is. There is as much life in 1 teaspoon of soil as there is on planet Earth in terms of humans. So there is an unbelievable amount of life within the soil surface, and that supports everything above the soil surface, us included. Compost tea, the liquid form of compost, that can be a really great way to improve your soil health. So you can purchase that online. You can purchase that at some local garden centers. It's aerated and aerobic. It's really high quality, and you just want to spread it across your landscape in liquid form rather than in, that soil-looking form. So now I want to talk about kind of, I guess, the least fun part of all of this, but a part that's super important to the success of your plantings, and that is applying maintenance or applying land care. Do note that the first year after plant establishment, especially if we're talking about native perennials, that first year is the most important. So we want to make sure that these areas get water, at least 1 inch of water per week. If you can water every other day in the first year, that's highly recommended. 2, pulling weeds. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Something to keep note of is make sure you get them while they're small. If you look at the pictures at the bottom of your screen, those are 3 pictures of the same plant, Siberian elm. I think it goes without saying that we'd all much rather remove the plant to your left than the plant furthest to your right. Keep your planting clear of debris, and really listen to your planting. Be observant. Check out when you need to replace mulch. Check out where there's problematic areas and where you need to replace plants. So as far as providing land care with weeding, I like to encourage people to have 3 timestamps in their head at least that designate when they should do a weeding. The first is on or near Memorial Day. The second is on or near the 4th of July, and the third is on or near Labor Day. What this does is it's a really great time to capture early, mid, and late season early, mid, and late season weeds. If I were to add one more date to this, I would say do another weeding on or near Mother's Day. If there are any flowers, any weedy species getting established real early, weeding them out on or near Mother's Day is a great way to keep your planting weed free. So the main points of land care and maintenance is 1, pull weeds. 2, be observant of your planted area. It's inevitable that some plants are going to do better than others. Some areas are going to be spotty and problematic while others are bursting with blooms. Just be mindful, and it's a really good idea to transplant your successful species into areas that are struggling a little bit. Mulch as needed. I like to recommend mulching once every 2 years, but really just look at your mulch, and if you see it starting to disintegrate, starting to break down, replace it. If it's still looking good, if it's still looking wood-like, let it go. Something that's really important in the spring is to wait on cutting back your plants. So if you can wait until after average temperatures are above 50 degrees, that's a good time to think about cutting back. And when you do cut back, leave those stems. Hollow and pithy stems are really great nesting habitat for our bees. So 30% of the bees in the state of Minnesota are stem nesting bees, and leaving those hollow and pithy stems for them is creating nesting habitat for those species. So now I just want to thank some of the really great references I used today. Douglas Owens Pike, a lot of really great information I used to help create this presentation.